Right, everyone, the alarm bell's gone and it is now 9 o'clock and we will open our meeting. Welcome here today. Any chess fans amongst you? Chess, the game of chess. Any chess fans? Well, those of us that are interested in it watched a bit of the live streaming. Mind you, it's just about as exciting as grass growing, but at times. But yes, we have a new world champion, Magnus Carlsen from Norway. So there we are. Yeah, a bit of a relevant information for you to start the Audit and Finance Committee meeting on. Oh, okay. Righto. Launching into the agenda today with one apology, Councillor Arkata Brown. I'll move receipt of that apology and seconded by Councillor Stoltz. All in favour say aye. Aye. Against carried. Right, we move on to the minutes of the last meeting. You'll move, Councillor Dowsing. Seconded Councillor McLean. All in favour say aye. Aye. Against carried. Anything arising out of that in an action sheet will include as well. You want an update on?
I think there was a update on the breakdown of cost of democracy that was going to be given.
So in the page 12, it states that the governance, and it was just very much at the high level, and it just said that governance was 100% UAGC funded. We collect 2.4 million in rates, and the external controllable cost is, the direct cost was 1 million or 44.3%, and then you have the overhead charge, which was 1.4 million. Did you need more detail than that? Oh, no, I put it in the minutes, sorry.
Councillor Seymour.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One question from page 9, item 10.5. And with respect to the revenue team leader, it was reported last time, but I just want to know whether that, the second to last bullet point, does that include anyone impacted? It says we've only 3 people on extreme hardship remissions. Does that include anyone impacted by the storm events in Uawa?
Not at this stage. That was from the previous financial year.
Thank
Yes.
you. So there could be more in the current financial year. Yes. Maybe that could be reported to the next meeting. Maybe
yes.
It could be reported to the next meeting, just in general.
Put it on the action sheet.
Are on rates for remission for hardship. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. Work program, any comments from anyone on the governance work plan? Okay.
I have one further question, comment,
sure.
Mr. Chairman. I just think it needs to be made really clear because there's some work going on. Page 12 of the action sheet and the first item, with respect to the camera trust, and it says security functions move to council funding the camera trust. And I just think the phrase funding the camera trust might be a bit loose because it might be a lot more than is being made available at the moment. So I just think draw that to your attention. I think we need to be clear about what we're saying in there. There might be some funding, but it sure is not funding the total of the camera trust. There's a grant situation and there's a Heart of Gisborne grant, but none of it has been finally determined yet.
Okay, so that hasn't been determined, right? So we'll have an update on that.
Level of funding would be more accurate to report in here because it could be interpreted that it's all the funding.
Mm.
Thank
okay.
you.
So just running through other parts of the agenda that are leave of absence, acknowledgements and tribute, public input and petitions, extraordinary business, notice of motion, adjourned business, and I haven't had anything alerted around those, so we'll move to reports, which first one, page 18. And okay, who's going to lead the discussion around this?
I'm going to
Is it Reg or Lois or somebody?
Yeah.
Or both?
Yeah.
Welcome, Rich. And Noel. Okay, anything you want to add to or emphasise in this report?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just through you, I suppose start just wanting to clarify an error in the report on paragraph 17. There is one error there where it reports the paper is of high significance, where it has been classified as medium significance at the beginning of the report. It should read medium significance. In regards to, and then I just want to draw your attention to the graph that was provided as Appendix 1. So the graph that was provided in Appendix 1 shows the trends in consent numbers for both district and regional consents, also the trends in regards to non-compliance with statutory timeframes. What we've provided you, and what I'm wanting to point out in there is the first column in 2016-17 is the first quarter stats in your far left, I think, as you see it. And then if you have, and that, why I point that out is because there's three data sets that represent the first quarter. So for 17-18, there's the data sets there for the first quarter. And then at the very last column, which is the 18-19 first quarter results, showing quite a market increase, especially in terms of the regional consent numbers that have been received. On the papers that you've been provided this morning, on the desk, you've been provided a similar graph that's just the regional consents only, and so that should emphasise it a bit clearer as well to remove the district level consents versus the regional consents. So hopefully you find that is useful. And then, do you want to comment on that?
Just through you, Mr. Chair, just to sort of explain this graph, because I know many people like me don't think in quarters, but think in months. So the start of the graph is July to September 2016. It's on the left-hand column, and the end is the most recent quarter, July to September 2018. So I guess just in context for this, we staff for about 50 to 60 consents, regional consents per quarter. They're a cyclical thing. We have fewer consents normally in winter, and then people start to gear up for their activity over summer. Regional consents principally, what drives our work program is forestry harvest and water takes. And so we have seasonal trends in forestry harvest consenting because people want to get their work done over summer, so the consents start to sort of pour in the second quarter of the year, and then and progressively over the summer. So what we found over not just over the last 2 years, but of course in line with what's going on regionally with the increase in forestry harvest, is that overall our consent numbers are increasing quite a lot from that kind of base we used to get of about 200 a year of regional consents. And we started to see problems in compliance with our statutory timeframes kind of late in 2016. We did address the issue at that time by getting on board some fixed term staff whose contracts ended last year. And really, unfortunately, we have never returned to that kind of base level of 200 consents a year. And we now seem to be on a kind of a long-term trajectory of increased numbers. This year, we started using consultants to quite a high level about May. So in that fourth quarter, when we were really starting to see our stats slide badly, I think that the next quarter we will be better as a result of the use of consultants, because we had a huge backlog of consents. But I guess the underlying problem is that we've moved to a new, a new base in terms of the number of consents that are required to be processed. As you all know, forestry harvest is projected to increase until about 2028. The other thing that's been a big driver for regional consenting is our freshwater plan, and particularly what we've moved to now in order to address our over-allocation issues is renewal periods in bulk. So we've just completed the renewal of all the Makori Aquifer resource consents to cut allocation from those. That was 40 consents that were processed in a 3-month timeframe on top of our kind of norm, we will be getting 67 consents in the next 3 months for the Waipawa River. So we know there's a big bow wave of work that's coming up. So I guess that's just a bit of the kind of the workload context that's explained on this page. Just the other side of the graph, Reg will talk, Ms. Prophet will talk to this a bit more, but just the cost implications of delivering consents late. So we cannot charge the full cost of a consent if we go beyond our statutory timeframes. And this graph just shows that obviously we're slipping back a lot in terms of meeting our statutory timeframes. We're now having to incur reasonably significant costs in terms of discounts to consent applicants. Unfortunately, as we talk about in the report, while that might be good and that at least they're not charged the full cost, from their perspective, they're still getting a very late consent, so they're not happy. So that's just a bit of an overview of those two.
Thank you, Nadine. I'll get you to comment around this, please.
Thank you. Morning, everybody. Through the chair, so I just wanted to outline that what we are asking for here is that we are moving around the budgets within the operational spend from OPEX into salaries. So essentially there's no impact on rates, but what we're trying to do is be transparent and put costs where the costs should be residing and reduce the number of consultants. So it's addressing a resourcing gap. It's addressing a service issue, which we've been told time and time again from developers that using out-of-town consultants isn't helping. But at the same time, I think this should be, in terms of the increase in activities, viewed as there is a lot going on. It's signalling a lot of economic growth in the region. So we do need to keep up with this. And what we're signalling is that we would like to vary the annual plan. It's not an amendment. So we have seen references in the report to an amendment. It's not an amendment, it's a variation in moving costs where costs should be sitting and reducing expenditure in other areas.
Okay, I'll just have a quick comment and then councillors can talk about this. Even though with our significance policy, it says it's medium risk, and that's quite right. According to our policy, it is medium, but I see this as actually a high risk. I mean, issuing consents on time and with the ability and resources to be able to do it is really important, and that's a major task for a council, a territorial authority. Yeah, one of the issues actually, just an aside there, normally I wouldn't have thought that the Finance Committee would actually be dealing with the options, the actual operational options to deal with this, and we'd just be dealing with the financial ones. But anyway, it's on the table and we have to react to that as well. It concerns me a little bit that in paragraph 5 that we've been losing staff in this area. And here we are, not only are we short of staff, but we've actually been losing them, and yet we have to suddenly build this area back up again. And so are the people available? Are we going to be able to recruit people to replace the consultant work that we've had? And looking at the options 1, 2 and 3, I think we're being really optimistic if we're going with option 3. I would like us to have a discussion about option 2 as well, which is redeploy staff. And I know that it says in the body of the report that there may be a risk around various staff not wanting to be redeployed into a consenting area, but at least that should be tested because really we need to change this very quickly. And to be honest, projects that are listed there, like the spatial plan, well, is that a priority? I think we really have to look at the priorities about what work our planning staff are doing. I know the spatial plan is a very high-level document that is great for planning processes, or feed into your district plan and all the rest of it, but it's not urgent. As Councillor Thompson pointed out to me, yes, in an area like the Bay of Plenty, where it's expanding very quickly, you need some overriding development plans because there's an urgent need. You are forced by the urgency of new developments, but we're not quite in that situation. So I would like some consideration about actually redeployment of existing staff as well, and I guess that's up to staff to just investigate, but I would need some feedback about that. But I'm going to then hand over to Councillor Stoltz for her comment. And okay.
Thank you. I am
I was very happy when I saw this report because a few of us have been involved with people that come and see us about some concerns that they've had about timeframes. So I'm very happy to see this on the table. I'm also happy with option 3 because I do think we need to take the long-term view. We see a lot of growth in our region. We need to slowly build up a workforce that will stay. People won't leave because there's too much work or too many expectations of them. There will be enough people to do the work. So I'm happy with option 3. To me, this is a proactive response to the increased demand. So I'm happy to support option 3, but I'm also willing, maybe we can have a little bit of a compromise between option 2 and 3, where we do look at building a long-term workforce, but maybe redeploy a few staff members at the time to fill those spots.
Councillor Dowsing.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think it's a compromise between option 2 and option 3. I think that they're both equally valid, and potentially there's a piece of each that needs to be deployed. I also think there's an option 4. Later in the agenda, we've got our document around our forward planning and digital services, and there's quite a lot of mention in there about deployment of digital services for resource consenting, and there's not a lot of mention about the use of AI or putting in systems that will predict and assist staff, so to make them more efficient. So perhaps we're not going far enough with our digital deployment. Perhaps we should be looking at more intelligent systems. But that's a potential that has a slightly longer term delivery time, and we need a solution now, which is, I think, an option between 2 and 3. What I do see though when I look at this is that the growth isn't necessarily new. In the quarters of 2016-17, we had quite similar numbers. Have we reduced our staff that much since then, or is there a big change in the types of consents that we're getting that are more onerous?
So through you, Mr. Chair, we did use at that time fixed term staff that we employed on short-term contracts because at that time we'd hoped that it was just a temporary blip and that we would be moving to more normal consent numbers, but that hasn't proved to be the case.
So we had a similar increase in 16-17, restaffed by moving people internally. Is that?
No, through you, Mr. Chair, we employed some staff on 6-month contracts.
Yep. So we have a model that worked to meet that demand then, but we haven't been as reactive this time, it appears. Or we've taken a different model, we've taken a different approach, I should say, but it hasn't been quite as effective because we're starting to see the decline in performance. So I think that, learning from the staff numbers at that time and employing a similar strategy of perhaps 6-month contracts may help. But I think, yeah, there should be a focus on that investment in the business intelligence to make sure that who we do have and in the future we're working as efficiently as possible. I think that there's my experience from applying for consents is a lot of paper shuffling, a lot of and not a lot of digital work because of, you've got to bring everything in paper form. So there could be improvements made there.
Councillor Seymour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This paper had some real gaps in it for me because surely to goodness, funds that are being paid to consultants can be transferred to be paid to employed staff. And I couldn't understand why that wasn't provided for us. And I did flag that to Mr. Zaman yesterday that I was going to be asking about that. So, and I appreciate this because 61% increase can be 61% of anything. If it was off, 100 consents, it's X, and if it's off 500 consents, it's a considerable greater number. So thank you very much for this provision overnight. I'm not happy to see us improve number 3. I really do think we have to be much more vigilant. You only have to go to our annual report and to the annual plan for this year. I went back and looked at the staffing salaries and they're quite considerable and they have got increases in them. So what I can't understand is why you haven't been able to, and maybe you can this morning, give us the difference of what's being spent on consultants now that will be available to be spent on permanent staff if you just shift that budget within your own department.
Sorry, through the chair, that's entirely what option 3 is about. So we are
Doesn't
not
say that, though.
We are not asking for any additional funds. What we are asking to do in terms of being transparent is around moving the budget out of the consultant's operational spend and putting it into the salaries. And so you'll see the salaries line increase in the annual plan, but overall there will be no increase in expenditure. So that is what the purpose of the paper is. We could have gone ahead and just made those savings and reduced consultants, but you would have seen it come out the other side. Even if we employ fixed termers for 6 months, you will still see that hitting the salary line. This way was being transparent to council so that year end of the next financial year, you'd see that cost sitting in the salary rather than in the operational budget. Probably not is what I've articulated.
Yeah, look, I assumed that was the case, but to me, it's more concerning, okay, that money is available to just transfer to our staff. But again, I'll raise the issue, and I'd like an answer on this. Are we confident that we can actually put enough resources into place that we are actually meeting the timeframes of issuing these resource consents? Because that is the real issue here. I know it's not a financial one, but it is an essential requirement of local authorities to meet the statutory timeframe. So is this going to work? Is it going to be a combination of slowly building up the numbers but still using consultants? But doing that, are we going to start achieving the timeframes? That's the question.
So through the chair, according to our staff calculation around what additional resources we would need, this will address the gap. But because the consenting area relies on a number of other processes to work as well to make it more efficient, there is a whole program of work going on, and we have some support around working with our team to look at the most efficient way to manage resource consents. We're talking with external developers around their experiences so we can address that any issues where there are inefficiencies in our process. So it's an and approach. So the other part, there was a question around, well, how important is a spatial plan? Let me tell you that a spatial plan is fundamental in order to be able to make changes to our district plan or our Tairāwhiti combined plan so that we can have a smoother process running through. So all of these parts depend on one another to work. Fundamentally, we have a resource gap in terms of personnel at the moment, but we're working on all these other pieces of work to address it as a whole package.
I just want to say one positive thing out of that is to recognise the issues that have been raised, as the Chief Executive alluded to before. Developers have been telling us for more than a year, 18 months, 2 years, that they find it really frustrating working with consultants who are not familiar with our district. So, and that is referred to in this paper. So that's really helpful. But there's just a couple of lines that could have been taken out of the annual plan that would have made it a whole lot clearer, because there is 1.4 million under consultants. So if the paper was prepared showing that more clearly, there would probably be more support for it.
Councillor Foster.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was just going to reiterate actually about the frustration that a lot of the developers are having. I mean, I think as councillors, we all get different people coming to our ear saying how frustrating it is having to deal with people from out of town at times without any local knowledge of different issues, and the time that it's taking. So this is a really high priority area. The resourcing is our core business, and the time frames are so important. And we are experiencing some tremendous growth in the area. So it's really important that we rise to the occasion and make this as simple as possible for our customers. So I support option 3, but I'm also in favour of option 2, like Councillor Wilson, and trying to redevelop some internal staff into those positions. But it is so important that we get these timelines ready and have the right staff, and the less consultants that we use, the better, because local knowledge is really important. And for local plans, all our district plans and everything, that local knowledge is imperative, and the connections with locals from that local knowledge as well. So.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, certainly when I read this, unlike Councillor Stolt, I was very unhappy, but the language has changed a bit in that we are now given assurance that it's just a transfer of one budget item over into the next. And if that's what it is, then I'm reasonably relaxed with it, as long as we remain within those budgeted items. The other thing that a little concern I'd ask a question is it talks about that along with increased fees. Now, are we talking about fees that have been set at the long-term plan, or are we talking about further increases in fees?
Doesn't mean that there's an increase in fees total because there's more consents going through, or does it mean an increase for each individual consent?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's just that when we have increased resource consent numbers, we have an increased number of fees coming in. So that's the offsetting, is the increased amount of money that comes in through fees.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chairman, we're down to 63% being met within the time frame. It seems there's a couple of issues here. Firstly, we need to catch up, and maybe that's where some redeployment is required. And then we need to stabilise things and keep on top of the workload. So I just make that point out. And given that it's financially neutral, it's fine. Yeah.
Councillor Dowsing.
I just had two questions around this, and one was first of all the knowledge gap. If we're employing new, whilst they may be local, will they have the knowledge of the industry of resource consenting to actually provide that knowledge that people are looking for? The other thing is if we're having trouble getting these processed, what about compliance and monitoring? Is the staff levels acceptable for compliance and monitoring at the moment?
Can I just respond to that, because it was part of yesterday's EP&R meeting. It is a different issue, and Mr. Zaman has made some considerable strides in that area. Okay. And people are employed, and the team has grown. Correct?
Yes, through you, Chair. Yes, that is correct. And just in terms of the first issue you raised around the people with skills, that's a challenge with any employment and recruitment processes to do that. So I don't see this as being any more than any other recruitment process we do through an engagement.
I'd be happy to move an option then, which might be slightly different to what's worded here. But I, like yourself, I don't believe that this is particularly an issue for us, because it does seem very operational. So I think that it should be approves the chief executive use any option to it may be recommended. That's fine, but I'm recommending something. I'm moving something else.
But what you're moving is...
Point of order.
Yeah. Go for gold. Oh, I apologise, Shannon.
Would it be just easier, Councillor Dowsing, just to say the chief executive consider all options?
Yes, that's
exactly
use that
what phrase,
including the option to develop an annual plan variation, as worded here.
So, Stoles, you can have your say now.
We're going down the path where we are saying this is not a governance decision, it is for staff or for management to. Why are we not then just moving what management recommended to us?
Because the paper's not complete.
Well, if we are saying we are not going to interfere from a governance level and say what Shannon, I'm just saying what Shannon just said is it's not for us really to decide. Staff came up with this and said, this is what we think will work best. I'm just using some common sense here. Why would we convolute the whole issue if staff are saying to us option 3 is the option that we think is best?
But Councillor Stoltz, if a paper comes to this committee, the information is before us. I would have been quite happy just to approve a variation to the annual plan, but we have been invited to assist or direct our staff in the way of allocating resources or conscripting resources is probably a better word. And so we're quite entitled to comment on that. And we have got a slightly different, well, some of us have, a slightly different bent on this. And I can only reiterate that this is a really important area that we have to really get on top of very quickly. And I'm quite happy to leave it to staff. And then in fact, I don't even require it in the recommendation, but I would like them to take on board our concern that this is a very critical issue and we want them to deal with it urgently. And if it means redeploying, recruiting, get on with it and do it.
By all means.
So anyway, Councillor Dowsing, just say again what your recommendation was, please.
The council approves the use of option 2, all options, inclusive of the development of an annual plan variation, option 3. And the reason for that is so that we're not being prescriptive, so that we're not eliminating the choice of redeployment of staff.
Okay, I have a seconder. Councillor Thompson, are you doing it?
And I'm going back to the regional transport paper from last week here. And in the spatial planning area, it was talking about there's no real budget for the spatial plan. And so I'll just read number 19. A detailed budget has been developed as part of the project planning process. The majority of the work will be undertaken by staff. However, some external inputs will be required. To some extent, this expense is offset by the underspend on salaries due to some staff vacancies. So according to that, we're moving salaries budget out to external providers. And so I'm also questioning, are some of those vacancies, would you have considered some of those vacancies in the arena we're talking about here? And why, if we can move vacancies to external providers, money that's salaried money to external providers, are we doing the same for the surplus within the area talking about where you've got staff vacancies and are we using that money for external providers rather than our external provider fund? It just seems like we're moving it all, and here it seems like we can cross it over to a totally different job. If you know what I mean.
Do you understand that question? Yeah.
To that, through the chair, I just need to point out that the area where it talks about redeploying is not in that area that the director is responsible for. So unfortunately it falls on me, but you were, as Councillor Wilson has pointed out, invited into talking about operational matters of which I determine. So I would not have allowed that through had I known the discussion that we're going to be talking about redeploying staff from another area which is paid out in another revenue and finance funding stream into a resource consent area. Actually, that option isn't really on the table. I would have looked at that and we've decided that it's not practical to redeploy. The spatial planning funding and the spatial planning consultant budget is sitting in another line, another cost centre, not funded again from the same revenue and finance stream that would come out from the environment services and protection area. So they're two different areas. I take on board what you're saying in terms of the redeployment, like I will, and that is what we do, we consider that. Ultimately it is around staff choices if they want to go into different areas, but to make that decision around redeploying here without actually recognising the impact that you're going to have on your overall work program and your ability to change your district plan, I would not recommend that. What I would say is I'll take on board the discussion that was had here, but what we are seeking is approval to vary the annual plan going forward.
Just before I get to Councillor Dowsing, yeah, we're not directing you, we're just wanting you to consider that. And our opinion, well, I don't know if it's universal, but I hope it is, that we consider resource consents work is actually a huge priority. So do everything possible to get the resources in place and preferably, as you say, to have our own staff doing it. Councillor Dowsing.
Thank you. Yes, I absolutely agree. The recommendation is not for council to direct you to do that. The recommendation is allowing you to do that if you see fit. I'm a little disappointed that it's actually listed as an option if it's something that you, that you disagree with. It would be much better as an option that has been considered and disallowed, so that we're clear that your intention is not to redeploy. In that instance, because you don't want to exercise that option, I'm happy to amend it and go with the wording as provided. But
for Shona's sake, what is the recommendation now?
Moving the original recommendation as written on the paper.
Okay. Yep.
Because the staff have indicated that they do not want to utilise the other method of reallocating staff.
Is the seconder okay with that?
Yes. Oh, did someone else second it?
You didn't. So you got your seconding it now? Okay.
Fully offset rather than offset, because we don't know if we've been told it will be fully offset, and I think just clarification, offset rather than consultant cost. So fully offset.
I'll just ask the Chief Executive, is that the case that it will be fully offset?
Just a clarification. So,
Yep.
Sorry. Get it? Clarification. There'll be no impacts to rates. It will be a reduction in operational costs and an increase in fees due to the volume of resource consents now being able to be achieved.
You heard it from Pauline. Okay, so I've got it. Do we need more discussion? Councillor Seymour?
Because that does then mean that the salary budget could grow, because that, and it might not have been what Pauline was trying to say or Ms. Foreman was trying to say, but in actual fact, if you listen carefully to what it was said, there will be more fees. So effectively, if one was really alert, the organisation could spend more of the fees on salary. So that could impact on, so it does need to be fully offset.
Well,
and the other thing I wanted to say, which is slightly different, I'll let you come back to that, is we shouldn't be surprised, and I mean us as councillors, if a person in here chooses to apply for the position when it's advertised, because that's what happens, isn't it? So that's not redeployment as such, it is the voluntary choosing of someone to move within a department.
Yes.
And so that could happen. Yes. I just wanted to make that clear in case someone asks about that later.
Yes.
But just going back to the explanation that you just gave with respect to the money, I could just see more money being spent on salaries if there's an increase in.
Look,
and I think we're making a meal out of this.
All it means is the increase in salaries is offset by the income. It's as simple as that. Yeah, but the income's higher. It's just that when you look at the annual plan, it won't be the same as the budget that's there now. Well, anyway, I've got that recommendation on the table. All in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Thank you, people. Might have been a bit like extracting teeth, but we got there. Okay, so on to the next paper, and we're on page 25. More mundane but essential things, Treasury report.
For the Chair, this is not really much different from any other months, as we still processing with regards to Treasury. Debt hasn't gone up, and it's a simple indication to see where are we and what do we plan to do is if you go to page 26, and then at the bottom of that there is the graph which shows over the course of the year where we expect to draw down in our funds. The blue line at the top is where we have forecasted or within the budgeting processes. The yellow line, the middle one, is where we're at. And then obviously the orange one was last year's. So that gives you an indication it's following the same trends as per usual. It's been nothing different from previous months as such.
And just with our policy settings, with the percentages on what length of terms, there is no view that we're going to change that, not going to increase longer term debt.
So the policy settings of where they fall due and the percentages that they have, where it's got in the bottom on the paragraph of 25, and it says currently council has 52% of its debt facilities maturing in 0 to 3 years, and the policy is 15 to 60. Those policies are set by PwC in conjunction with most other councils, and they are sort of the basis and recommended for the time and length of uncertainty over the loans. And what happens is, while you have a little bit more in the early years, that's kind of what you want to do, because you want to have your short-term borrowings that are all facilities, bank borrowings in there to any fluctuations. So there is no changes in that.
Okay, it's always a question asked. Robert.
Yeah, Pauline, just a question about the graph. I see the actual 17-18. The end point in June is about 45 million. Then the start point for the following year in July starts at 55 million.
So it's a midway, it's the end of that period. So there was movements in the month of July of about a 5.5 million within that period. So that's just the normal movements that goes through in there and things. So where you have the end, it's like a continuous end point of that particular part of the graph.
Yeah, it looks about 10 million, but anyway, that's besides the point. The other point I'd like to make, just having read a summary of economic forecasts recently, it's not a bad time to look at maximising the locking in borrowing at the moment at lower rates. I know you're getting advice on that all the time, but just an observation. Thank you.
Just with that, yes, you're right. And as part of the just recently on the 2nd of November, which is not in this reporting period, we have a $5 million debt, long-term debt due in March. And while the base rates or the base rates of your interest isn't really fluctuating, it's not much difference, the margins were being indicating that they would change. And currently, I believe the margins are about 70 to 80 basis points. They were firm indications that they would raise to be 20 to 30 increase. And with that, the recommendation, and that's fixed, so it goes throughout the whole of the life of the loan. And so what the recommendation was to say to actually draw down on the loan before we needed to. And so we have actually, for the first time, if you like, a deposit. But the deposit that we receive in interest at this time is 4.7%, and the cost of the debt borrowing is less than that. So it made sense in every such to actually do for the first 3 months to preload a loan beforehand. So we are looking at all of those sort of situations when we're moving into how can we actually better position ourselves.
Any other comments from anyone? Questions? I'll need a move for the report. Councillor Burdett, seconded Councillor Seymour. All in favour say aye. Aye, it's carried. Okay, so we've moved to page 49. No, 31. 31. I'll jump over it. Okay, financial report.
So, through the chair, it's following the same trends as what we had said for September, and we are seeing variances, and we're saying that the variances are because of the emergency works that we are now completing. And so we will see variances and more expenditure in our operating costs, but we're also seeing a corresponding more income. So it's going to be a neutral effect to our council because we are the NZTA VAR rate is 92% and PGF funds for the emergency works is 8%. So there's a neutral effect to council, but you're going to see a lot of variations in our through the course of this year. So overall, where it states it there, it just says that we are, at this particular point, 1.8 million net surplus, better than what we expected from plan at this particular point. So if you're looking at page 34, it's a bit hard, and I'm going to get them to put the variances in there so you can see straight off rather than trying to work it out in your head as you go along. So on page 34, where it says total comprehensive revenue and expenses at the bottom, so it's got 12.9 million against 11 million. That means that is a 1.8 million favourable where we are at this particular point in time. And that's mostly due to more revenue, which is 2.8 million more revenue than expected, and over the expenditure. And I think that's probably the main points bringing up.
Questions, comments? Councillor Seymour.
Thank you, and thank you very much. I mean, the report's great and the notes are great, but...
Button, turn your thing on.
Button. The report is great, thank you, and the notes to the report are great, but sometimes the preface isn't consistent with reports to other committees, and particularly because yesterday's Community Development Committee had a substantial discussion around the museum roof. And if you look at the very last paragraph and the last sentence on page 31, it says that the project is not having started while external funds are being sought. Well, the facts of the matter that were quite clear to the Community Development Committee yesterday, there's still a whole lot of work to be done to design the roof. So if we can just make sure, especially as the governance support person is asking us for feedback around our reports, we just need to make sure they fit with consistent messages, because there's a lot of work to be done on agreeing a design of the roof, and there's no costings yet on what the ultimate roof will be. So it's not delayed for funds. That's only one small aspect of it. Thank you.
Robert.
Yeah, just really a little bit of clarification with our roading. My understanding is that when we repair a road, that's operational expenditure, and when we renew a road, renewal of a road to a better condition, it's capital. Is that a correct interpretation? And when does one start to merge onto the other?
No, that's correct interpretation, and that's how it's reflected in these set of accounts. If there is maintenance on the road, a pothole or whatever that they're doing there, then substantively that is recorded as operational costs. And that's why the emergency works is to repair or reinstate what it was before as being recorded as in that regard. And when it comes to the renewal, it will be if you're doing the resurfacing, and Dave can explain it a lot better than what I can, but resurfacing on the road, that would be considered a renewal.
Yeah, that's what interests me, if David could comment, because, you know, we might have a badly damaged road and repair it, maybe even to a better standard than previously. Does that then the whole project become capital, or is it operational and capital? Yeah.
Yeah, David.
So thank you, Chair. As we work through our budgets for the year, we have our CapEx and our renewals, and then we also have our maintenance. So the way that we do it in a rough kind of, or the easy way to explain it, because it is case by case and it depends on what we're doing for the stretch of road that we are replacing. So as Pauline alluded to, if we're doing, say, 1 or 2 potholes on a stretch of, say, 200 metres, and there's a couple of potholes, then that just goes straight down as maintenance. If, however, we're ripping up that piece of road, if it's sealed road, and we're milling it up and then replacing what's underneath it, it does come back up to a higher standard, as you say. That's capital. So we have actually changed and we've upgraded the value of the asset. It's similar if you think on the unsealed network where we put grading over the top of a rural road. So grading is absolute maintenance. That's just what we do. However, if we go through and we rebuild up that sub-base and put more metal on, then that will tip over into capital when we're putting on large amounts. Small amounts is maintenance. That's probably the easiest way to explain it. So small little pieces, maintenance, big rips up, then that's when it becomes CapEx after that, is the rough rule to go by.
Are you guided by NZTA discussion around what you call it?
So through the chair, no more by the auditors and the finance team around which way it goes.
Quite correct that we're more pedantic on those criteria than NZTA. NZTA don't care. It's the work on the local roads, whether they do it renewals or they do it maintenance, but we are very pedantic on that.
Councillor Seymour. Can you put your button on again, please?
On page 43, and I'd written the note to myself and now I can't find the reference, where do we find the income from the Kanakanai forestry, which is referred to elsewhere in the report?
They just had some forests, they felled some of the trees just recently.
Sure, but whereabouts in the financials do we find that figure?
Oh, no, they haven't. You only see
Not
it.
here yet?
No, and we'll get that because at the time that we're doing the report, we would also have to work out, is there any cost associated with it, so you get the profit and loss recorded. So yes, we can put on it. I think cash-wise, it was under a couple of hundred K, but I'll have to confirm that.
Right, thank you. And then on page 44, under support services, it says grant income received from MBIE for a program manager's role. And can someone please remind me for what program that is that MBIE are funding?
I think so. It's either for the mayor, is it?
No, that'd be police. The erosion coast protection.
Okay, thank you. So, I mean, that's quite a long-term exercise. Thank you.
Yeah, the rest of us didn't hear it.
For the East Coast
so the MPI, the MB funding, MB funding or the MPI one?
MBIE, it says on the top of page 44 in the first paragraph under support services. And I'm just wondering what program that is funding.
Oh, look, we've got a number of funds from MB and MPI for program manager roles. So that could either be the MAR, there's the LIDAR one that's also come in, they're partially funding that. And the other ones I was talking about, was MPI, the ECP fund. So that's likely to be the MAR or could be a LIDAR one, but we can come back and let you know.
But supplementary, Mr. Chairman, if it's going to be recorded in our papers, it would be useful if it just says what program that's for, because it's meaningless unless it tells us which program it's actually for. Thank you.
Councillor Foster.
Mr. Chairman.
One query. Every time we get these reports, under development contributions on page 35, we get the same sentence. A variance from annual plan is due to the number of development projects undertaken being less than expected at the time of setting the annual plan budget. Now, my question is, was the annual plan budget set too high, or have we not got enough, are we not getting the development contributions that we would be expecting when we do actually have a lot of development happening around the place? It's not, I don't think it's as if we haven't got, a lot of proactive developers trying to work around. So, is there any comment on that? Why?
Through the chair, yes, there's going to be a bit of work we're going to do on the development contribution. So if you actually, we're looking on page 47 as a sort of a corresponding to that, there's the special reserves. And it says under, if you look at it, it's under stormwater, water supply and roading. And they've got the figures in brackets, which means that it's anticipated to receive more of the fundings from DCs, but at the moment it hasn't been realised. So part of that work where we'll be we will be forecasting what it is, what's coming in and resetting that information, but it needs to be done in more detail, and it has been there quite a while. Yeah. And what these were, we will reset these from probably the depreciation reserves in these particular cases. So we start from afresh and we look at what we're actually coming through. So there will be a bit of these are the areas that we've got to come into and tidy up.
Right, okay. So,
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
on page 35 also, I've just been looking at Barry's one, and I had seen it noted before, but it talks about on 0435, the variance annual plan is due to collecting more rates than budgeted for as a result of increased capital value in a number of UAGCs. Now, I always thought that the capital value, we set the rate as a level, and the capital value is who pays what, rather than the amount being more. So, am I wrong with that?
It could be worded just taking out the increase in capital value. That's the way it's calculated. But the UAGC, you're quite right. When it was set at the 30th, when we first did the forecasting for the long-term plan, we had based on the 2016-17 number of UAGCs. When it comes to setting the rates, which is as close as possible to the 30th of June or the beginning of the new year, there is either new developments, redevelopments, or you assess that some properties have been split, and we check the database. Because of that, when we did, from the time that it was originally said that this is the amount that we would have in UAGCs to what actually was set, there were an increase in the number of UAGCs, and that's what that is from.
Yeah, so I think the wording is a bit wrong. It's suggesting that just because you have a rise in capital rates, that's going to influence the amount of rates you get. That's not. It's set by the policies. Okay, Councillor Cranston.
Yeah, on page 40, we've got line items for a few budgeting projects and that. On navigations, I just wouldn't mind the alignments explained, because the actuals on year-to-date on double the budget year-to-date, and the reforecastings, I guess it's that 1.2 million of external funding, but there's 1.2 million there above the budget as well. So if you could explain that line to me.
When we set the long-term plan, the external funding, which we were going to, from PGF, wasn't included in any of these projects. And so a number of those projects, from the bridge project, from the Cook's Landing, I believe, and the others that were there, now we know that we've got the money for it and that will be coming in. So that's where the main variance comes from. So what was the navigations or in harbour project was about 9 million, I think. Now it is registering up to 25 million. So there will be some variances in this area, which we're just working through the timing of that. And what's the impact, so we can give you a little bit more details. That's similar, that will happen in the annual plan process. What we had for the projects in the second year to be completed, what now we have from external funding, they will be increased, and hopefully that we will align that in the annual plan, so you don't see these variations that are coming quite in with there.
Councillor Stolz.
One question that's on page 31. I know we've had recent discussions about re-looking at our wastewater and the timing and the phasing and the finances around that. The second bullet point on page 31, Pauline, just talks about the last sentence says, this is mostly due to wastewater projects being rephased to occur mostly in the second half of 18-19. And I was just wondering, is this already a change to what we signed off for our 10-year plan in June, or is this just standard that was as part of that project, as part of that process? This is
so this particular part is just how we split the budget for the year. And normally when you were looking at last year, you would just see whatever the budget was for the capital program, be 1/12, and you would just see these huge variations associated with it, because you didn't know is it a variation because you're not doing it, or is it just a phasing variation? So when we tried to get a more of an alignment at the beginning or at the end of the year to actually phase, when are we going to do these projects? And so we phased it based on that information at that time. However, since that time that we said that we were going to do that phase, it was realised that that particular part of the work won't occur until the second half of the year. So it's no changes to our budgets, it's just the way that we are reporting, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, can I have a seconder, please?
Shannon, second.
Councillor Dowsing, all in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. We'll break the morning tea.
What happened to our coffee?
sundry debt. We've got Fiona here if there are any curly questions. She's good at curly questions.
Just an update on that. It's on the first page, the fires. That is nearly settled as of this date. So that issue has been paid to council, majority of that.
Which one? The number two?
Number one.
Oh, number one.
The bigger one.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah. And the second one, which is the deed and completion principal work Waikino Stream, that is just waiting, Ministry for the Environment, just waiting for a final report for clarification of that. So that's yes.
One thing that caught my eye on page, about the mortgagee demands, I can't see what page it is, 52. And my memory is that in the past, we didn't, the numbers we are looking at here is 287 mortgagee demands were seen. I think that is very, very high. I used to think we would have much less than that. Is that quite standard to have nearly 300 mortgagee receipts? And it's wonderful to see that 113 is now resolved. But when I read that, I thought historically we had much lower numbers than that, because we usually don't sell off significant numbers of houses. Yeah.
Through the chair, it's fairly standard. And the 287 is when we start the process in July. So that's when we send out a letter to both the ratepayer and the bank and say, we are going to start this process. And then in the time between then and now, the 3 months, we've had a really good response. 62% of people either paying in full or making an arrangement to avoid further action. And that reduced the numbers down to 109. So
might have had no action with, or people not responding yet. Next steps is that just keeping the process going with letters, or you in the end sell something or have something sold.
So we approached the mortgagee, and I think we've got 2 that are resisting payment, and what we would do is process that down to a rating sale. But those sort of things would come to council first because they involve people with a dwelling on a property, most likely in these instances. And also we're developing a debt management strategy as part of our revenue and financing policy review, and we want to get those in place and have council's agreement to everything before we went down that. So it would eventually lead to that, but we will probably have a slight delay this year because of that development of that strategy.
How many of those sales would we usually see in a financial year, or the process being completed and us then going down that path?
The process to a rating sale always takes about 3 to 5 years. It's never completed within 1 year. It is a very long, drawn-out process that you've got to jump through quite a few hoops. And it does get approved by council if we do bring any to this table before we continue any further. And it's often you find that they do get resolved at the last minute.
Councillor McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On page 54, under sundry debtor age debt, and under environmental services and protection, and under science, I just wonder that outstanding figure there. Can I have some explanation or expansion on what that is, please?
That's on first page, the science. So it's up for MFE, and that was the majority of the ones it says for the Waikino Stream milestone claim. So we have separated that one out. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Moved to Councillor Stolt, second to Councillor McLean. All in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Yep. That's all right. You can ask the question.
I was just wanting to know what were the amendments. It's number 17 on the bottom of page 51, and there's further, local authorities are waiting a further amendment to the Rating Rebate Act that will enable more people to take the benefit of that particular subsidy?
Through the chair, so the Rate Rebate Act changed at the beginning of this rating year, where retirement villages were entitled to apply for rate rebates, and we have received some of those applications already. There's a further group of people that would be entitled, and those are people who are on a separate rating unit that is owned by the retirement complex. The way the legislation was written, those ones got admitted, and we have got 2 complexes here that are affected, and so they can't have their clients apply for rate rebates until that legislation's changed. And that legislation is sitting at the select committee stage, so there's still about 4 processes to go through, which can be halted at any time.
So it was an oversight in the drafting of the legislation?
Yes, it appears that it was, yeah.
Thanks. That could take 2 or 3 years as well.
When they first advised that it had been missed off, they had said that they were hopeful that the whole process would be completed by the 30th of June so that nobody would be financially disadvantaged. But when I asked again recently at our rating conference that we went to, I was told that the parliamentary process is what it is, and it just takes as long as it takes. So there was no guarantee that it would be finished.
Councillor Burdett?
Page 52 of the bottom East Coast workshops and whānau days, both Councillor Seymour and myself asked that this be spread across the place. I see in one instance workshops that have Victoria 13th, we go back to Expo, attack the Toko. That doesn't really solve the situation in terms of rates and outstanding rates and the concerns within those communities. Further to that, terms of the Act that's being used to change the policy in terms of UAGC. I think we asked the question, can we see it? We're only told about it. I've got a copy of it because it's in the council policy spread amongst the communities, but in terms of the Act, nothing, no one sees.
So what would you like to happen?
The first part of the question was, are those whānau days going to be spread across the communities of the coast? Or are they going to be restricted to those 2 communities again?
Through the chair, at the moment, we have no plans to add any other locations into those whānau days. These 2 locations are ones that have been specifically active with us and advised that they wanted these here, and that's why we go there. We did go to Tapuia, and it wasn't as successful there. And then of course they've got the office at Ruatoria, so they've got a facility right there. But sorry. Well, yeah. Well, we were travelling to Ruatoria and holding some workshops there, but we only need to be told by people that they want something, and we'll certainly have a go. But at this stage, we're not.
So through you, Mr. Chairman, if various organisations that we deal with request a meeting, you'll organise it.
Yes, we do get people contact us and who are up the coast, and we arrange to meet them at either of those 2 locations, or if it's on our way to or from, Angelie will call in and meet with them individually if they need that. Okay, so the challenge is there, Councillor Burdett, if you find groups that do want
Well, there are
it,
groups,
well,
it's just a matter of
you can,
grabbing them up.
Yep, okay. Now, as to the second part?
Well, in terms of the Act that's being used to impose uniform general charge on every rating unit, no one has actually seen where it says, well, this is what's got to happen.
I'm not quite sure
Well, that's
what you want in the way of around the Act with the UAGC.
We want to see it, not just be told about it.
Okay, through the chair, what I'll do is I'll put a statement in the next debt report about the section of the Act that we use for the uniform annual general charges.
Okay, that's all good. Thank you. Okay. So we're done and dusted there. Good. We did move that, didn't we? We passed it. So we're on page 56. Internal Audit Program.
So I'll just actually, I shouldn't do that, I'm not allowed to do that, sorry. Play with it. I'll just get Mel Grant to come up to the table as well. She's the author of this paper, but I'm also introducing you. You may or may not, Mel's been at council for 10 years and she has been in the role of management accountant team. She's responsible for producing a lot of the long-term plan, the annual plans, and then the oversight of our assets and evaluations and looking at those. So she has a wide knowledge of our activities for our council. And so first of all, is sort of, you get a face to the name that's writing there. I'll just open it in sort of generic terms, and if there's other specific things that I'm sure both of us will be able to answer your questions. So what this paper is just trying to say that we're actually trying to set the foundations for the internal audit, and it's trying to bring the skills that we have to by a proven method of internal audit process, which is around process, procedures and systems. And the initial focus that we have for this particular one is more around the efficiency and the effectiveness of the operations, including the safeguarding of assets and the reliability of financial management. However, it should be noticed that when you do an internal audit, that goes hand in hand with risk. And when you do an internal audit program, you would be aligning that program to what are the major risks of councils. And so you'd be working together with that. So this is just a sort of an initial saying that, yes, it is going to be a focus of us. And we're starting that, and we're building the building blocks within our own team to be able to work in conjunction, co-working with Deloitte at their skill sets that we don't know for some certain amounts of testing. They can work and give us guidance with it, and also software systems that actually can do that. So we're starting to set that up, as I say, with the foundations of an internal audit program.
Yeah, just to comment on internal audit, it's something that a number of us have been requiring to happen within this organisation for a long time. And quite rightly, Pauline, you pointed out that risk is associated with audit. The function of audit is to check that your risks are being managed and mitigated. And eventually I would see this report, and Robert here again, the correspondence I've had with you around risk, is that once we have worked through this program and have the resources in place, we will then deal with risk as a regular report to the committee, and with the progress of audits done to show that we are managing those risks. But to start with, it's mainly about the financial side of things, auditing to make sure that all our processes and information being received is dealt with adequately. And welcome, Mel. Pauline has given you a very good introduction. She obviously thinks a lot of your abilities, and maybe we'll see a bit more of you in the future, in fact, as the audit program rolls out over the years. So do you want to comment on anything, or are you just open to questions? Okay, so any questions there? Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much. So on page 57, number 9, you talk about well, it's basically a terms of reference, but they've got a fancy word for it. Have we already, is there already something like that developed, or is that what we're going to develop, or have you got something in mind?
No, that terms of reference or an audit chart, it hasn't been developed. We haven't had one, and as part of this whole process, we will do that as well. So you'd have that first before you start your internal audit program. You'd have a terms of reference with it. So yes, we will be developing this part of the process.
Supplementary, Mr. Chairman, is there like a need? Are there shelf type documents for this rather than having to reinvent the wheel?
Yes, there is. There's a number of councils that have got it, and we would just be making to see what they have, see what it fits, come back and say, yeah, and working from there.
And further to the supplementary, Mr. Chairman, so the comment was made, this is basically going to be this TOR or whatever the charter is basically going to be around the finances, is that correct?
The terms of reference for internal audit will be generic, but we're just saying that the internal, the focus of the internal audit at the moment is around efficiencies and effectiveness, and it happens to be starting within the financial area.
Councillor Seymour.
Thank you very much. I mean, there was some work done on that about 18 months or 2 years ago in this organisation, and some councillors participated in it. I mean, is that still available to you, or is that lost? Yeah. So, and can we expect the timeframes to be met? I note it says it's going to take 4 months and will be finished by February 2019, but that's on page 58 at item 15. It is really important, and we have spent a lot of time talking about it, and there's been a bit of pushback. So it is really important that we do keep it moving, because most major organisations with budget and expenditure the size that we have in here would have this process in place. And so that if we can expect that to be done by the end of February, my next question was, when work's done, so if you go down to bottom program work and the employee benefit review follows on from PwC's external audit conducted in 2017. Now, obviously, we don't want to know anything that personalises any data that's contained within an employee benefit review, but one would expect that that material would be reported back to the council, because that is, as it says here, 21% of the expenditure of the organisation. So when we do this work in the future, it will be reported back to this committee time and time, each time, I would expect.
Chair, yes. In answer to that question, yes, there are major reports, unless it's an operational nature, and then there, but if it's the main points of it will be reported back to this committee.
And will you set up some time frame? So we've got the time frame of the end of February where the initial work will be completed. So can we have some time frame? So then we've got something to measure against, and then we really understand that, because Gisborne District Council is taking this process seriously, because otherwise we get things and we talk about them for a while and something else sub-crisis happens and something gets pushed back. So if we actually understand this is the time frame you're working towards, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
So for the chair, yeah, I should have explained that. This part of the initial part is to establish the foundation, and then we'll do a charter. The program of work over 3 years would have to come back to yourselves as first to see what that program of work is. And within that program of work, it would be put into the governance work plan of what we intend to do and over the times with it.
But it needs to be in a bit more detail than in the governance work plan, because I don't think that gets given quite enough grunt. So yes, we need to understand the charter, and that needs to come back to us. And it should say that you expect to have analysed, because council officers must know what they believe to be the most at-risk area that should have the highest priority when you actually start this process. So I'd like to see that level of information by the end of February with the report. Thank you.
Just through the chair, I would say that the work that we have, and the reason why we said that the charter comes first, and that will be earmarked to do it, because it's reasonably off the shelf and changing the sort of the things to affect it, and we can deliver that within the annual plan process. The reasons why the program of work that comes afterwards will take a little bit more time, because we actually have to assess the risk, what needs to occur first, and then we put a report to you to say this is the initial thing. So it has to be assessed first with it, and that's why it's from the March onwards that we will be giving that program back.
But I'm sure senior officers in here have got a fairly good idea what the risks in this organisation are. And I see the Chief Executive nodding. I'd be very surprised if the directors were not aware of what the most significant risks in each of their departments were. And we report on them anyway, against projects, for example. So I'm sure that it shouldn't take too long to gather those risks together.
If I may, through the chair, so what you're seeking in 4 months' time when we come back with a draft charter, we come back with areas for prioritisation, is then how long is it going to take to complete one audit and show us that time frame moving forward so you can measure it? Yeah, then we can provide that.
Thank you so much. That's exactly right.
Councillor Stolz.
I have 2 questions about the budget and the financial. Reading that paragraph 25, it comes down to about 10 to 15K per review. Is that correct? So we've got 2 that's nearly finished and then 1 for June coming up, the accounts payable. It talks about the prioritising the professional fees budget for the finance area. So the question I have is, were this budgeted in that area already? So we knew when we set the professional fees budget for finance that we would potentially have this, say, up to 50 or depending how many we use there, or are we now using that? Was it not budgeted for and we are now using that professional service, which is for this? I'm just interested to know if this was in there initially. And I can see now it's been reprioritised, but I would just be interested in that.
It's a bit of both. We had some for internal, we knew that was going to occur at the same time. But also what we had in previous years, we were heavily dependent in the annual report process of external resources to come and actually help us do that. In the last one, Beth, who did the annual report, he basically did it himself. Apart from one parts of the consolidation, he would have done the full amounts, but it was just time delays. He couldn't do it when the auditors were there. So we saved significant savings by bringing it back in-house. And so part of that has allowed us to do probably one extra one than we would normally have. Yeah.
Foster.
Just wanted to know, I don't read it anywhere, but as part of the internal audit, does it take into consideration staff morale and staff culture at all? I mean, I guess, you know, I'm not saying there's any problems or anything, but if there's anything that was picked up at all, anything that did happen, is there a facility or some way that you know, could be addressed?
There's a separate procedure for that, and it's a staff survey, and that is a separate process, and that will deal with exactly that. Any other questions? I'll move receive the report. Second, Councillor Stolz. All in favour say aye. Aye, against carried. Okay, we're on page 61. The Finance and Audit Quarterly Activity Report, and a couple of the committees have already dealt with this, and I was watching the live streaming yesterday, the Environment and Planning Committee, but I must admit it's quite hard actually watching live streaming. It's the first time I looked at it, and I never lasted until you got onto that item, so I never found out what you thought about it. So I require 2 things today. One is any commentary and questions about the detail, but secondly, at a higher level, whether you've found the report useful, whether you've got any suggestions for modifications, or you're happy with that report that it does provide what it's intended to do. So I'll open the floor.
You've just been given a page, and people who were here yesterday were each given a similar page, and we've been making our own comments directly.
Oh, well, we don't need to do it publicly.
We don't need to do it as a committee, but we can add, I understand, if we want to.
Yeah. Okay, James. He has been the driver behind all of this.
Oh no, it's been a team effort.
Yeah, I know, but I think we're responsible overall for it. So yes, anyway, that's why you're sitting at the table.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's sort of spearheaded by Cater and I in a sense, but we've brought together a group of our best and brightest people to help us tackle the issue of integrated reporting. Just some brief comments, I'll keep it short, but we are here to, this is an iterative process. You'll see different versions of this coming through as we receive your feedback and internal feedback, as well as we work to improve and refine these reports. Of course, as has been mentioned, this isn't the only quarterly report. There are quarterly reports going into all committees. And so there's an opportunity there for every councillor to look at those if you so wish. Sitting atop these, in a sense, is our CE report. So that provides a global overview of the health and activities of the council. And these are more specific to each committee, really wanting to generate some feedback so that we can refine them. What I can say with hand on heart is I'm a lot more proud now to put my name on the cover report than perhaps I was previously. There is room for improvement, but I believe we're on a good path and we've got the right people working on a solution for us. So it is two-phase. The first phase is to ensure that we get the right output. That's what we're talking about today. And the second phase will be largely an internal one where we get the right systems and processes to allow us to bring the information through operationally and in a more efficient and effective way. I think I'll leave it there, but welcome any questions on the content of the report. And as has been mentioned, if you've got views around its format, etc., there is a formal process in the form of a survey, because we're wanting to get your feedback on paper as we work this process through. But this isn't the end, it is the beginning in a sense, and better things to come still. Thank you.
Thanks, James. So, Councillor Seymour.
Thank you very much. No, the new format is great, thank you, and I'm sure most of us will give you some feedback. But I'm looking at page 64 and just reflecting on some of the matters that have been before us today, and we're talking about the divestment of some surplus staff housing, which is only 3 houses. But it says a contract has been engaged. Is that telling me again that we've had to go outside of this organisation to get someone just to bring that to fruition?
No, the work has been done, and we've brought the paper to council to say that we've identified that those houses were surplus, but it's actually real estate, and you actually have to get them to see to do the work ready for the final part. So yes, it's part of that process.
That's not quite what that says in the second bullet point, though. That's my point entirely. It says a contract has been engaged to access section 40. Well, I think you're just telling me that we've done that, and now we're moving to the next stage.
No, sorry, that is still being assessed as part of that contract.
Well, that won't be a real estate agent doing it, will it?
I believe they have got contractors that are doing that process.
So
yes.
we are contracting out doing it.
For that particular ones, yes, we don't have that capability to do that in-house.
I thought we had in-house lawyers that could assess section 40 of the Public Works Act.
No, not in this particular case.
Right. So I just think we need to be a bit more explicit in some of these things and less wordy in other parts. So the other thing that on that same page, Mr. Chairman, that bothers me a little is the continued delays, or if it might have been done, the management agreement and leases in the final stage of being agreed with respect to the airport lease, and we have heard that for heaven only knows how long.
It is very, pardon me? That is what it is. We're working through every sort of part of it and why we had the principles in place, and that was the main things that had council approval for that. The actual devil's in the detail.
Yes, and indeed. So we have not had a comprehensive report back to council and public excluded, Mr. Chairman, if there are some issues around that. And my understanding is that they don't feel they can go ahead with their upgrade of the terminal until this document is signed. So there's a whole lot of issues that are sitting out there, and everyone wants to see a terminal rebuilt, and the plans are in place. I don't need any private information right now in the public part of the meeting, but we just continually report, and we've had that same words in the final stages of being agreed, and that's what we've heard for months.
Any update there?
Yes, I will comment through the chair, and I took on board your request to provide the management lease once it's completed and signed, and so that will still come back to council when that has been signed. But Matt, Todd and myself have been meeting on that. We met earlier in this week to resolve some further little details because they have their board meeting next week, so we're tracking for that sign off. What I will say is that there have been delays on both sides, so it is not council dragging the chain. It is us working through a thorough process so that both parties can have an outcome that are both satisfied with.
So supplementary, Mr. Chairman, if their board is having input into some elements right now, is there something that, which you just, that was what you said, should we be having input into anything that might be different to what we authorised to be agreed?
No, sorry, so the board is not having input into it. That's all being managed. So we've had, your input was through the heads of agreement, that was signed off. We've been working through the operational aspects, it's reporting back to the board that everything's all good to go next week. So that's what we said in terms of our deadline.
It's consistent still with the authority that we gave council officers to negotiate under. Thank you.
Councillor Foster.
I think I just want to congratulate staff again on the format of this. I'm finding it really easy. It's easy to get all the information you need. I'm getting more questions out of this format than I've had in previous times, just from the information I'm getting. So, I think it's a great format, and congratulations. I do have a question on the bottom of page 65. Right at the bottom, consult, evaluate, and decide on the future asset transfer of community housing to GHL. This is on hold as we are waiting for a business case from GHL. Well, I think we've been waiting for quite a while. My question is, how long, have we had any indication of when we will be receiving a business case from GHL so we can put this to bed? I mean, we've had this on our books for a long time.
Yeah, through the chair, I think the other part that's running parallel with this that will impact on a business case or otherwise is the work that's been done with ECT and GDC. So you'll get a report back from Cameron Partners as to where they've landed when they were looking at the picture overall, right, which might see potentially that accelerate or not. So I think we just need to let that piece of work run, and Tracy, the CE, is involved in that. So the
Cameron Partners report will be at the next council meeting?
A high-level overview as to where they've got to, and it won't be at a council meeting, it's a public excluded meeting.
Cool, okay, yeah, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going back to page 64 and one of the topics that Councillor Seymour raised, the best surplus housing assets, and it does say that they were approved by Councillor Sell, and from my memory, this goes back a couple of years at least, because it has to be quite some time. And I would wonder whether we should actually have a look at those to see that nothing has changed strategically before and confirm that resolution still stands before we move further. Because, for an example, we were going to sell a section at the same time. We were going to sell a section that bounded onto Harry Barker Reserve because it seemed like there was no point keeping it. And during the negotiation to sell that section, it was decided after years and years and years of that the hockey turf would go back to Harry Barker Reserve, and suddenly it became strategically important probably to keep that section because for access or for parking or whatever. So we were able to pull out of that sale agreement before it got too advanced and say, no, we've decided to keep it. Now, I would suggest that these other properties, I don't know where they are, has someone had a quick overview of them to make sure that things haven't changed over those years, and just it may well be nothing's changed and still good to go, but I think it would be wise just to have a quick look and make sure that that's the case before we proceed.
Through the chair, I think it was introduced quite a number of years ago, but there was a paper last year that identified the three properties and the rationale for it and why, and that there wasn't a need for those remote locations that they were talking about at that particular point in time. And this isn't this is a stepping stone to doing that, and depending on if time went on before the decision making to sell, yes, you would review it at each particular point.
Are there any impediments to, I can't recall what the restraints around those pieces of land are. Does anyone know what are the constraints that will require a long process?
That's why that part of it says that checking out the clearance, section 40 of the clearance public website.
So we don't know yet.
Yeah, they have to go through that process.
Yep. So that does take some time. Yep. Okay. Anyone else? Move Councillor Stolt, second Councillor Dowsing. All in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Yes, these reports will become easier and easier to read because it'll be the same. Well, mind you, James has said they're going to fine tune them a bit, so they may not be exactly the same, but I guess the general format will be the same each time. Yeah. Yeah, so can everyone get them in? When do you need those in by? Just hand them in straight away? Okay. Righto. We're on page 81. Okay, these activity and surpluses and deficits.
So this report is really a little bit, we started in October last month when we gave you more in details around the capital expenditure and what the impacts of things with it. So similarly, we were trying to do with the activity surpluses and deficit. So you have background and what they were and what does it actually mean and how is it derived. And so this is the intention that came from that. And have given, there's reference to old previous papers, which is 2009-10, and then subsequent 2011-12. So, and while it was talking about interest and charging interest on these balances, it was giving you a little bit of a history of what was making up some of those balances at that point in time. So overall, basically, these where we're looking at is it's the accumulated surpluses deficits at the end of the financial year. And as it says, it represents the total activity surpluses balances of retained earnings and its accumulated net income that is retained by the council at that point in time. Just to be of note that currently the surplus funds or funds that we don't, that have either derived from not doing the expenditure or we've got increased income, if it hasn't been separated for future years' use by transferring to a reserve, by default, it actually reduces our overall debt. Our policy, as you know, we do not draw down on debt, we use all available cash. So that goes towards reducing our need for debt at that particular point in time. And that sort of underlying that approach where they're talking about the surplus index and what you're using it is within our liability management, where they give references to operating surplus will also be applied to the reduction of debt. It was quite a complex process in actually trying to get the information. And also sometimes when you look at the surpluses, it looks like, okay, there's a surplus there, therefore you've rated for it. But in actual fact, some of those items are non-cash items. It's not being rated for. It's either been from an accounting adjustment, or it might be from a valuation of biological assets or vested assets, which sort of says that it is a surplus. Correspondingly, there could be a deficit associated with that. So it becomes, on the face of it, you need to delve a little bit more if there's, but it gives you overall trends of what that was and what it makes up, and it gives you an idea of the background to the activity surpluses and deficits.
Clear as mud? Councillor Burdett.
And animal control and the surpluses in there, And this has been ongoing, and I have mentioned that environment and planning, some of the issues regarding animal control. Can someone tell me what is proposed to, what is going to happen with those surpluses, because they're huge?
So just for reference, the other part that Councillor Audit is referring to is part of the finance report, and he's looking at the individual activity in there. But in answer to that question, and that's something that we will be looking at as well, if you received funds from NZTA to do the stock control, they will be looking at, if at the end of the year that the expenditure did not occur or there was a bit of a surplus, it would be transferred to a reserve to apply for in the future for the use of that cost associated with it. So it's not, won't be lost, and that particular ones you would be saying, yes, it was revenue that was given for a particular purpose, we would make sure that we earmark it for in the future.
I can have assurance that it will be spent in the area that's been...
Oh, definitely. It has to stay in that area.
Yeah, as you see, we've got quite a few reserves where there have been surpluses where the money hasn't been spent yet. Yes, it's earmarked for that bill. Councillor Seymour.
Yes, I just want to support that because this matter has been raised at EPNR over a long period of time, and NZTA do give us 180,000 for stock control, primarily on the stakeholder identified where the issue is most significant. And Councillor Audit obviously really familiar and hears by direct phone calls a number of occasions when there are stock on the road. This matter was raised yesterday at EPNR because there is a real concern that the funding is not being distributed appropriately. It would appear. So Mr. Zam gave an undertaking that he would look into that. But when you look at the surplus in there, it just seems to be absurd, 654,000, and without detailing, which we did do yesterday, the actual hours employed. Well, actually, it can be detailed. The out-of-hours officers are only employed for 20 hours per month, and the point was made yesterday that outside of hours could be 11 hours per day, and so there does seem to be something not quite fitting together. If there's potentially 11 hours of out-of-hours work per day, and yet the stock control office is expected to maintain safety on the East Coast roads are only employed 20 hours a month. So that was covered off yesterday, but that's why we've got this surplus in somewhere where we should be providing a far better service to our community.
So I guess that point was raised yesterday as well, and the response? Sounds like it hasn't been solved yet.
It's been raised for 6 months and not been solved, so it is really important. And as I say, Councillor Audit is the one most familiar with the issue and gets regular phone calls. And he stayed for EPNR meeting yesterday so that these matters could be raised with the manager. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dowsing? Oh, sorry, put your hand up. Anyone else? Robert?
I'll just make a quick comment here. I mean, the thing that really affects our ratepayer base is we've got to minimise the money going out of the whole organisation and maximise the money coming into the whole organisation. How you account for that money, and that's what really makes a difference. How you account for that money internally makes no difference to the amount of rates we need to collect. Seems like we've got a pretty fair and sophisticated method of accounting for that internally, and one that means that we're maximising our treasury operation because we're freeing up surplus funds to reduce our outside debt. And I think the staff are doing a good job of this. It's a complex process to make it fair and transparent and difficult, but I think it's going quite well. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Councillor Foster?
I guess I should make a comment because I have brought this up quite a lot in the past about deficits and surpluses and offsetting. That's right, it's clear as mud. But when you look back into the past of all the things that we had to pass a council to keep the books in check was quite horrendous, actually. when you're looking back to 2010, 2011, what we actually did. But now staff are kind of organising it a lot better. But there's always the concern that, I guess, as far as operationally, when you have a deficit offsetting a surplus or vice versa, that it does interfere with the actual operation itself and the outcome of a particular operation if it's been interdepartmental in particular. So at the end of the day, it's all about performance and be able to make sure that every area is performing well and not compromising one area because of the inefficiencies of another. You know what I mean? So I can see it's a lot more complex than probably I imagined to start with, and I compliment everyone on this report. It's good to have it, but still, it's very complicated.
But anyway, I mean, your comments say, the previous report is where you monitor the performance of each particular area, those quarterly reports.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Okay, could I have a mover, please, for receipt? Councillor McLean and Councillor Burdett. All in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Right. I see Yvette very patiently waiting down there. She's just champing at the bit to come down here and give her presentation. Is that right, or am I wrong? Okay, thank you, Yvette. Very important area, and I know it's a bit of a moving feast, this, so I guess at any point in time, it might change next year.
The recording.
Yeah. It is, yeah, delayed. Oh, is it? Delayed in case somebody swears and they can turn it off. I'm putting in the comments you should have seen.
Right.
Is that relevant?
All right, so thank you. I just wanted to, I think you're getting a more detailed paper to a future council meeting about Pamour and some of the decisions that you've got to make around the options for that land use. This paper, we wanted to put this in front of you beforehand so that you have a little bit of background on what's actually quite a complicated issue. So we'll do our best. The focus really is of the presentation is around how the ETS works at the moment, our main interests in the ETS as a council, and there's a little section at the end about a couple of the changes that government is proposing that will have potentially significant impacts for us that we'll go through as well.
Anyway, we'll arrange that. Yep, carry on.
So the focus is on Pamour, as because council has a more the Tauwhare Pārai forestry interests are managed by GHL in a quite an independent way. With the Pamour block, we have a MOU with GHL to just manage. We have not ceded responsibility or accountability for them to them directly, so that's our keep. And there are also a number of little woodlots as well, but they are nowhere near as significant as Pamour in terms of the ETS.
So just wanted to preface by saying that. So the first bit, how the ETS works. Basically, you've got it's a layered structure, and some of the complications that we have with the New Zealand ETS system stem from us trying to So there's many masters to the ETS. Essentially, you've got an international agreements that are.
Excuse me, you guys. Look, can we just give Evie a fair chance here? Thank you.
So you've got the international situation, which we're trying to give effect to, as well as but make it work for the New Zealand context. So this system has been designed by economists, and it is incredibly complicated. There are fishhooks within fishhooks with it. So hopefully you'll be able to get an understanding. But I just wanted to go over and give you a sense through this slide of just how significant the change is, and I'll just talk through. So in 2002, when we first signed the protocol, we committed that we would get our greenhouse gas emissions down to 1990 levels by 2012, and we achieved that. So then we moved on to 2013, we developed a new set of agreements, and that was to get below 5% below our 1990 levels by 2020. This is New Zealand. This is just New Zealand. Yeah, and New Zealand is on target to get to that point, and now they have started on the next lot, which is the Paris Agreement was signed in 2016, which we were one of the first countries to ratify that, and we will get, our goal is to get to the equivalent of 11% below our 1990 levels. So you can see this is really ramping up internationally. And just so that you're aware as well, by 2050, there's a long-term target to get us below, to 50% below our 1990 levels. So yeah, they are really ambitious targets, increasingly ambitious. So the government's doing a whole range of things to combat this, not just the ETS, but the focus on this is around this economic tool. So what it does is it basically asks the polluter, in inverted commas, to be accountable for the emissions that they produce. It does that through internalising the costs of carbon emissions onto that firm. That's intended to make it a business cost, so that when they are thinking about their business, they're thinking about reducing emissions. That's part of their business plan, or thinking about ways that they can store carbon. So for foresters to maintain and increase this, how they store carbon in their trees. So that's the guts, that's what it's trying to do. It's just an economic tool. It's mainly, here's my little sticky pointer thing. The main unit of that is really annoying, isn't it? Where's the laser point? At the top one. Oh, there it is.
Items here, but the only way would be for Brian for you to actually announce it publicly so we can turn it off.
Okay, we are going to suspend live streaming of the service because we are experiencing technical difficulties. Thank you.